Howdy y'all, this is William. We're back with the second episode of A Picture is Worth 1,000 Bullets. In this episode we're looking at another Don Troiani painting entitled Until Sundown. This piece came out in 1991 and depicts a moment during the Battle of Antietam, or Sharpsburg for you southerners out there, where Col John Gordon of the 6th Alabama was approached by General Robert E. Lee, and he famously exclaimed that he would hold the position until sundown and try to prevent the Union from breaking the rebel line in the middle of the sunken road, otherwise known as the Bloody Lane. This is a great piece. It has a lot of key historical figures. It captures a lot of crucial moments, and there's a lot of great, interesting detail to it. But before we go ahead and talk about my thoughts on this painting, we're going to go ahead and look at the certificate of authenticity and try to learn a little bit more about the history behind this particular piece. So check it out. Since first light, it had been peaceful for Col John B. Gordon and his 6th Alabama. For some 4 hours that morning, it was September 17th, 1862, a Wednesday, they had watched the fighting develop a mile or so to the north of them, and listened to the rising thunder of musketry and artillery there, and wondered when their turn might come. Col Gordon and his men had experienced some hard fighting in front of Richmond during the Peninsula Campaign back in the spring and early summer, but that could not compare with this. The early morning fighting to the north, as they later learned, was in places called the East Woods, the West Woods, and the Cornfield, and had the look of the biggest battle any of them had ever seen. They had taken their present posting in this little farm road between Sharpsburg and the Antietam Creek 2 days before. The day before that, on September 14th, they had been in a stiff fight at Turner's Gap in nearby South Mountain. None of them knew just why General Lee had brought them here into Western Maryland, or why they were making their stand at Sharpsburg. But it looked as if Marse Robert wanted to take on the whole Yankee Army of the Potomac, and that at least they could understand. John Gordon's 6th Alabama was part of Robert Rodes' brigade, which was part of D.H. Hill's division, which was part of General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, and the Alabamians knew each officer in that chain of command to be the hardest kind of fighter. They could guess that before this 17th of September was over, they would be right in the midst of the battle themselves. It was an article of faith in the 6th Alabama that Col John Gordon led a charmed life. He would personally lead the regiment in every battle and never be hit. "They can't hurt him," the men said. "He's as safe one place as another." At 7 Pines outside of Richmond in May, Gordon was the only field officer in the regiment still alive when the battle was over. 59% of the men were dead or wounded. Not surprisingly, the 6th Alabama went into battle at Sharpsburg with 7 Pines stitched on its flag. A month later, leading a charge at Malvern Hill, Gordon counted 7 bullet holes in his uniform and not a scratch otherwise. After that, he wrote, "A sort of blind faith possessed my men that I was not to be killed in battle." This position at the center of General Lee's long battle line was a good one to defend. Over the years, heavy travel and erosion had worn down the surface of the farm road until it resembled a shallow trench, and the men strengthened it further by turning the split rail fence on the side facing the enemy into a rough breastwork. To reach the road, the Yankees would have to cross a low rise in front, silhouetting them against the skyline. On the military maps, the position was simply called the Sunken Lane. It would soon earn a grim fame by another name, Bloody Lane. A few minutes before 9 a.m., General Lee himself suddenly appeared at the 6th Alabama's position. The regiment was at the center of the sunken road line, making it the center of the whole army. The rest of Rodes' brigade was in the road to the left, and George B. Anderson's brigade of North Carolinians was to the right. Lee's center was naturally strong but thinly manned. Only these 2 brigades and a scattering of other men of D.H. Hill's division, altogether just 2,500 infantry, and the general commanding felt the need to brace the defenders to their task. He had already seen the Yankees forming up in strength and moving their way. Lee had injured his hands and wrists in a fall some days before, the right seriously enough to require a sling, and managing Traveler was difficult, but nonetheless he greatly impressed the men as an imposing martial figure. Riding with him on this tour of the line was dark-bearded D.H. Hill, the division commander, and mustachioed Robert Rodes, the brigade commander. Lee warned Gordon that the enemy's attack would surely be a determined one. He must hold the sunken road at any sacrifice. If the line was broken here, the entire army would be imperiled. Bold Gordon was determined to reassure General Lee and at the same time strengthen the resolve of his men. "These men are going to stay here, General," he called out, "till the sun goes down or victory is won." Hardly 15 minutes later, the Yankees came, waves of them. First, it was William H. French's division of the 2nd Corps. The Confederates responded with a murderous volley. The effect was appalling, Gordon remembered. The entire front line, with few exceptions, went down in the consuming blast. "The rebel fire," said another man, "brought down the enemy as grain falls before a reaper." Each of French's 3 brigades attacked in turn, and each was wrecked. Then came the brigades of Israel B. Richardson's 2nd Corps Division. Rhodes and Anderson's men stood up every assault. Yet, the defenders were taking costly losses as well. John Gordon's charmed life was gravely threatened. 2 bullet holes struck him in the right leg, another in the left arm, another in the shoulder. He somehow kept to his feet, encouraging his men on the firing line. He reminded them of his promise to hold until sunset. But the sun, he wrote, moved very slowly. In fact, it seemed to stand still. Then a 5th bullet struck him, this one in the face. He collapsed with his bleeding face in his cap. Only another Yankee bullet that had ripped open his cap prevented him from smothering in his own blood. Gordon was carried from the field, and a subsequent mix-up in orders would cause the 6th Alabama to give up the sunken road. Yet, farther back, with a last, desperate, convulsive effort, the rebels managed to hold Lee's center intact. There would be no breakthrough here. At last, darkness descended upon the bloodiest single day's fighting in the nation's history. Colonel Gordon's pledge to hold till the sun goes down was made good. This certificate of authenticity was written by Stephen W. Sears. Stephen Sears is the author of Landscape Turned Red, The Battle of Antietam. His other books include George B. McClellan, The Young Napoleon, as well as The Civil War Papers of George B. McClellan. His To the Gates of Richmond, The Peninsula Campaign, was published in 1992. Alright, now for my 2 cents. First off, I love the attention to detail that this painting has, particularly in relationship to General Lee. He is depicted with his arm in a sling, which was, as the certificate mentioned, due to the fact that he had actually sprained a wrist as well as broken a hand as a result of losing control of his horse Traveler right after the Battle of Second Manassas. He'd actually been briefly forced to ride in a wagon or ambulance for a few days before he eventually learned how to control his horse with one hand. And so the fact that he's still able to maintain such a martial presence, where he is the center of the painting despite necessarily not being the primary subject. Everyone's looking at him. It really captures the gravitas that he had whenever he approached the scene. Look at all the generals in the background. Look at Gordon. Look at all these troops. He commands such a presence as he did historically. And so it's very fitting that even despite his injury, he still holds a lot of awe for those around him. Another interesting detail is the 2 generals in the back. Daniel Harvey Hill is perhaps not the most famous Civil War general. He's definitely one of the hard-fighting division commanders of the Army of Northern Virginia before he was sort of cashiered and sent out to the Western Theater, where he was eventually further cashiered and sent back to North Carolina. But he had fought tremendously well at South Mountain, so the fact that he is sort of one of these more forgotten Civil War commanders, it's great to have him depicted in this particular piece. And I believe it's the only Troiani piece actually depicting Daniel Harvey Hill. Also, you have Robert Rhodes in the background. At this point, he's a brigade commander, and he's going to rise up to the ranks, become one of the most efficient division commanders in the Army of Northern Virginia, before he's later killed during the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864. So, if you're a Civil War buff, you definitely know these 2 generals out here in the background, but the fact that they're not usually associated with the greater cultural depictions of Civil War, it's great to have them included here. Col John Gordon's presence in this painting is meant to show a degree of reassurance that he has, that he's going to hold this line until sunset. And looking back behind him, you see a lot of his troops are in various stages of preparation for the upcoming battle. You have some men praying, you have some men looking towards General Lee and the other generals as well as Gordon, trying to ascertain some confidence. You have some men preparing, they're knocking down the fence rails. You have some junior officers looking through eyesight, trying to depict the upcoming Union assault. So you really get a sense that this is the calm before the storm, that all hell is about to break loose really soon, and that there is a moment of tension. General Lee is looking at Colonel Gordon with a degree of confidence, trying to instill faith in him, while Gordon, who certainly looks up to General Lee and certainly wrote about how much he looked up to General Lee in his biography he wrote later in life, is definitely trying to impress the commander, try to instill some faith in him that, hey, I'm going to hold this crucial portion of the line. You get a great sense of the terrain, as you can see in the background. There's the rolling hills, as the sunken lane is behind the reverse slope of this position, so the Yankees are not going to be able to be visible until very, very close, and that's why this portion of the battlefield is so bloody and horrendous, just how close quarters it is. And it's going to be relentless for men on both sides, just due to the character of the terrain around this area. So as with many of Don Troiani's paintings, this one came out in 1991, so it's sold out on his official website, but if you want to, you can definitely hopefully find one on the secondary market, maybe eBay or Facebook Marketplace. But definitely one of my favorite prints that he ever produced, and highly recommend it. Go ahead and check it out if you can. Thanks for watching, and remember, please like, comment, and subscribe. I really very much appreciate it. Have a good one, y'all.